So it's good to be back and come to you with this episode. I'm really excited, about sharing this and diving into Bryan Olesen, who's the co-producer of this podcast, as you all know, and just do this a little differently today. But before we do that, as I was coming, I was thinking about that story you and I had in Estes a couple years ago. We were out there, and we've talked about this on this podcast, this story, but, during the second biggest wildfire in Colorado history. And we got there on a night, and the next morning went for a hike, and then we ended up having to have mandatory evacuation at Estes Park. And it looked like Estes Park was going to burn, and the house that our organization, Harbor Ministry, owns was going to burn. So we said our goodbyes, got in the car, and there was this mass wild, exodus out of Estes Park. All three roads collided, and the skies in mid-afternoon were red, and the streets were packed, and they kept one lane open for emergency vehicles. Coming up to Denver is this surreal moment, being in this disaster movie. And then there was this moment for me personally, a thin place moment of looking over at the river in downtown Estes Park, and in the midst of this chaos and crazy, there was this guy fly fishing, and just as calm as could be in the rhythm of the river. I'll always remember it, never forget that moment in the midst of crazy, chaotic insanity and fear and all that was going on. Here was this guy just calmly fly fishing, and it felt like that was a God gift to me for sure in that moment, to calm me down, but also reminded me, why we started Harbor Ministries 15 years ago in the first place, and why you and I have remained so committed to this mission over the last 10 years of working with strategic leaders around the country and in inviting people into our leadership events that we do, and why we launched this podcast to help people stay encouraged. Because for me, that image of that fly fisherman was in the midst of chaos and crazy and all that life throws at us, you can find steadiness and strength and a calmness in the midst of the storms of life that come at us,
Did you sense that as soon as you saw it, or have you reflected on it like a little bit later, did it?
It was on that drive, because we were there in such slow traffic.
Yeah.
I mean, it didn't hit me immediately, but as I watched it, it was fairly instantaneous, like, that guy's insane. And then it was, okay, it was just like God flipped a switch in my head. It's like, now this moment's for you. What do you see in here,
Yeah.
And
Well,
within
definitely was, because I
miles,
was in the car with you, and I don't really remember it. I can't recall. It bugs me that it's like, why wasn't I paying attention to that moment?
There was a couple other cars with us, and no one noticed it. So I don't know, what that was, but it was definitely for me. And I think it just has become this image that's been a rally for all we do, going forward, that if we can equip people that way to find strength in the moments like that, and then we've done something special, and I think we've done that for a while. And that was really the origins, as I said, of this podcast, to help people on the heels of COVID stay encouraged and stay connected to them. And I think it's shocked both of us how wide this podcast has gone.
Oh, yeah, completely. I mean, I think we thought this was a temporary thing as well.
Yeah, and it's just the reach across the country has been amazing. And so we're going to do this a little different and get some, visual of us doing this particular episode as well. But part of what's going to be familiar is we're going to follow Psalms 46 through this discussion, and some of the moments in that chaotic psalm where God breaks through. In the first couple of verses of that psalm says, God is our strength and refuge, always ready to help us in times of trouble. So we need not fear when earthquakes come, or in the story I just shared, when fires rage. We don't need to fear, because we got to trust God's going to be with us in those steps. And before we get to what I want to talk to you about is your incredible kind of epic journey the last year through the show The Voice. I know that also, because I know you well, has come on the heels of hardship and struggle in life, which happens to all of us, obviously, but I think for you particularly, God broke through in some of the pain in your story, right?
Yeah. Well, you mean before that, right?
Yeah. Sorry, prior to the time on The Voice.
No, definitely. It was like, it was the the most difficult valley for me. It was the hardest season. It was one of the only times I even kind of remember just almost even being angry at God for part of that season, and with just circumstances surrounding my divorce and stuff, and some of that I remember like inescapable pain, and you want relief from it. Even coming out to Estes I was kind of hoping to feel that newness of spirit and that refreshment of just getting to the spruce and being in the mountains, and it was like that couldn't even help break through. I remember at that time that I was still pretty thick in it, so yeah, when emerging from that, the beauty in that is, I don't know, I never thought things could start to get really good again,
Yep. Yeah. I don't think, we've talked about this a lot of times, kind of some of this we're going to converse on is just thin place moments you specifically had over the last year, but in general, being recognized in times and moments God breaks through. And often, I think in my own journey, that's been through the hard, times. The example of the fire, we just talked about, or times in my personal journey, but those are the times sometimes when we're more attuned and aware and, okay, what's God doing? But on the heels of that season for you, I know God gave you a great gift, and that's really where we wanted to break from our typical podcast here a little bit and talk about that specific journey on the national TV show, The Voice, which you finished recently and did particularly well in. And I wanted to follow a little bit of this track of Psalms 46, because in the chaos of life and what you just talked about as well, there comes this moment in the middle of Psalms 46 where it says the nations are in chaos and the kingdoms are crumbling, but in the midst of those kind of storms, God's voice thunders. And in the midst of that kind of storm, and it continues to say, mountains are crumbling, oceans are surging, but God's voice thunders. And when I think of your last year, and as you've talked to me, just on a personal level, and then seeing some of it play out on TV, it's like God's voice, he gave you a great gift of this journey. So, what's a couple things that you kind of remember? I know this thing started, most people don't know that, a year ago, probably with the recordings and stuff, but what's a couple things that you remember?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is, and you kind of encouraged me in this practice, is when you get around to the first of the year, you usually are prayerfully searching for a word or phrase or something that's going to be a theme for that year. And for me, my word for last year, and it's kind of carried into this year, I never really felt too strongly to have a different word yet, but was to dare to be authentic. And in a lot of ways that's really great, but it's also a very scary thing to do. And I remember with the voice, one, I've dared to do this with my kids, and that has I think drawn them closer to me closer to them. But at first you're like, is this the best way to parent, to kind of let them into, my weaknesses, my failures, and to just kind of lay all that out there. Sometimes as a parent, you want to just show them how to do things right, and you never really kind of like, hey, I don't know if I did this right, and I definitely messed this up, and so yeah, to dare to do that with my kids, but I also dared to do it with this opportunity with The Voice. Like, I've never been Hollywood, LA, filmed anything like that. I've never applied for any sort of reality show like this, and a lot of the whisperings were, be careful, because out there they're just out to, have a story and sell advertising, and they're not going to necessarily care for you.
Yep.
I had that in the back of my mind as I'm filling out the application and being really honest and authentic, and strange things that I thought to not leave in was like, well, do I tell them I was a worship pastor for 10 years at a church? Are they gonna want like a Jesus guy on this show? And I was like, no, tell, just be authentic. And I think that that helped in the end. Like, as scary as that was, I feel like they were very respectful with my story, and I was able to share, my story as it was, and so that definitely was a moment. But the whole thing set up, I'm coming out of the hardest season of my life, and now this opportunity literally got dropped on me. And I really reflect on some of the best things in my life. As much as I chase cliffs and try to make things happen, some of the best things I didn't really go looking for. And this seemed to be one of those things that just like, okay, this is happening. I'm on this show now, the oldest contestant that they've had, and well, I think at least I was the oldest contestant in my season, and the good of it just burned so bright because I was coming out of such a dark season. So I was just trying to enjoy every second, every moment, embrace it. And yeah, I think maybe one of the God moments that was surprising to me too, that stood out, was when I, on a Sunday, go to the pool area where everybody kind of congregates, and there was a large crowd of contestants just kind of having their own little time of worship, and that hit me, because in that moment I needed to just be silent and listen and soak it in.
Yep.
And I know that many times when we've done rhythm and rogue events, you get those 20 guys in the living room, and I'm telling the same thing. I don't know where they're coming from. And a lot of them are in ministry, and they always have to be on, and they're always the one leading. And I'm like, whatever posture you need to take in this moment,
Yep.
You don't feel like you have to sing as loud as your neighbor or sing at all. Just find what that is and enter in that. We just want you to connect with God and not, worry about what others are thinking. And I needed that in that moment. And I was surprised to see so many people worshiping God in that moment. So all those emotions were coming out in that moment. That here at The Voice, one of the most significant sort of worship times for me was in LA with a bunch of Voice contestants, and just being a part of them all praising God.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah, pretty amazing. Well, I remember you sent me a video of that, actually, I think that day, because I remember that had been last summer, right? And
yeah.
Some of the early recordings and seeing some of that, and that was a genuine, I think, surprise to you. It was to me, even getting that. It's like, that's not what I would have expected, in that moment, that you would get that kind of moment. So sometimes gotta keep our eyes open for those thin place moments.
Yeah, and that was a small gift too. I definitely felt like, The Voice, the whole experience was a gift, but there was another little gift in there, and then connecting with so many contestants that follow God, and to get to walk with them and make new friends.
Yeah, pretty sweet. Well, like I said, this is a little different than our typical podcast, longer and, more conversation, but I know, because it just happened here when we're recording this, people in the studio want to hear about it. They want to hear about your journey. We get asked that all the time. What was that like, on The Voice for you? And one of the stories that played out on TV, but I know it meant something obviously extra to you, was that moment with your daughter in the early part of turning some chairs, and
totally.
And what that was significant for you personally, understandably, but everybody got to see a little bit of that. Mm-hmm. But what was that like, and what was that moment like for you guys and you, and kind of how did that play out?
So many things, obviously God orchestrated that. So many things had to happen for it to play out the way it did. For one, I'm allowed to have 2 guests on the show. Well, I have 3 kids. And I know that my 2 boys, they're not eager at all to be on camera. Matter of fact, they tried to make a surprise video. I think The Voice asked them, you should make a surprise video for your dad. And it was just something where they're supposed to say, Dad, we're proud of you, can't wait till you come home, sort of thing. And my daughter sent me like all the reels. It took like 48 takes for them just to get those words out. Mm-hmm. And so anyway, my daughter is out there with me. She's my guest. And this moment happens where, they have to edit for TV, but while I was up there and I got the chairs turned, and Dan and Shay were leading the conversation, they were asking a bunch of questions. Like, they saw Jaden over there with Carson Daly, like, who's that here with you? I'm like, that's my daughter. And like, what? Bring her up. So that started where she's up next to me. And then they're asking questions, does music run in the family? And I'm like, yes, she sings too. And then they were like, would you guys sing something together? Would you do something right now? And I'm like, is this moment really happening? And I take there's no microphone for her. I mean, there was not rehearsed. I take my microphone, I hand it to her, and she starts into a song a cappella. The band has no clue that this is going on, but what they edited for TV is when you saw my daughter singing, the band was already playing behind her, but that's not how it played out.
Yeah, I got asked that actually. Was that really spontaneous because the music was already playing?
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, so she just sings it, and what was so amazing about that is I've done so many shows, concerts over my lifetime, but my daughter gets invited to this moment on stage with me with these 4-5 superstars right in front of her in a studio audience, no sound check. And that was the most nervous I've ever been singing for that show. The way they set it up, it was just like that. It just they don't clap for you when you come in. They don't, you don't get this big welcome. You know that those superstars are there, and you've got like 90 seconds to hopefully turn a chair. So my daughter comes up now, and I hand her the microphone, and she starts singing into this song a cappella. The band, though, they're so great that they we got this, we know this song, and they just kind of come in, and she does like a verse, chorus, and it's so awesome. And Dan and Shay were like, we want both of you on our team, and my daughter and I got to go sit on their coaches' chairs together, and she's the one that encouraged me also, like, to, she said, I think John Legend is the coach you need to choose. But after that, we went back to, because I don't usually like to eat before I sing, and that day I was like, I had to wait till 6:30 p.m. I was there early in the morning, and I'm waiting all day for my turn to do my audition. So we were hungry, and I said, no matter what happens tonight, we're going out for steak dinner. We're going to celebrate. And her and I we had the best time, and we were so giddy, and we were kind of like, did that just happen? Like, how did that happen? You did so good. And we just celebrated so much that night. I mean, it was definitely that whole evening was a thin place moment for me, and I specifically remember going back to my hotel room and just laying completely flat on the floor and just crying out and thanking God for such a wonderful moment, because it brought me right back to when I was deep in the valley and thinking that my life was kind of over and everything I worked for my entire life got taken from me. I mean, that's how deep in despair I was in those moments, and I didn't see moments of joy like that ever coming back.
Yeah, that's pretty sweet.
So it was incredible.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We both here in this particular talk have referenced this idea of thin places. You just said it again. I mean, just for the sake of description, the ancient Celtic Christians, that was a term they used to describe encounters with God when heaven and earth collide, and for a moment we get to see and experience God. That's what that fire and that fisherman was like for me. I mean, you describe those moments in a voice, kind of in the midst of what life is bringing us. There is these other moments that can come that kind of go to another level,
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as I've asked you this, and you've talked about this before, but how has your involvement with Harbor heightened you to be aware of those thin place moments even more so maybe than you have,
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to get to lead every group.
Yeah.
But the perspective that we have, because we're part of every new group, is we just see that the formula and how God is going to work in the group collectively and individually, you can't quite put your finger on it. And it's a beautiful thing. You're just kind of waiting to see that revealed. And for me, I didn't grow up in the church. I got invited to like youth group activity in my early teens, and it was a small Baptist church in the Northeast where like rock and roll was a sin. So anything with a drum beat, I turned in all my Van Halen and AC/DC tapes and CDs, and preaching. God only spoke through the King James version of the Bible. Like it was very just legalistic and structured. And so what you don't realize is that without Harbor, you kind of have this assumption that God only shows up and speaks on a Sunday morning, during the sermon. I wasn't aware of all the other ways that God is showing up and speaking and throughout every day, So these thin place moments, it wasn't on my radar until being part of Harbor, and just even taking a word and daring to be authentic and just like really trying to lean in. And also, I guess even when I was going through my despair, having the courage to God wants us just to come as we are, He was patient with me that whole time. I feel like my original church upbringing didn't give me the tools to live life that way like Harbor has. So, my experience in Harbor is really weaved through this entire moment and helped me to actually kind of experience it in a greater way that I don't think I would have had I not been through Harbor.
Yeah, that's great. You took a bold step by just jumping into the voice journey because there was risk in that and et cetera, for sure, and for you personally. And that's one of the things we invite people to do in this Harbor journey is take risks, take steps, maybe even when it doesn't make sense, to be willing to step out. I think one of the things I hope for from this podcast is not only will those of you listen to this be encouraged and get a word that maybe that you can hang on to, but also you might take a bold step and actually apply for one of our leadership journeys, because
absolutely,
that's a big step. But, you don't know us all that well. Hopefully you know us more through this podcast, but Rhythm in 20s for 20 and 30 something young men, leaders, and Rogue for more seasoned guys. Good way to say older
seasoned
dudes.
I like that. Seasoned.
Guys 30s and up, that's a 2-event-2-year journey, and Revels for women leaders. But maybe you check this out and, go to harborministry.com and actually apply. That'd be quite a bold step, on the heels of this, because I believe if you do that, you're going to have a heightened awareness of those thin place moments and God breakthrough moments in your life, just as you just described, Bryan. So, as this Psalms continues on and starts to finish, there's one of the most famous verses in all the Bible into the Psalms. I think, be still and know that I'm God. And in the chaos of the Psalms, oceans roaring, mountains crumbling, wars raging across the globe, as it says, and we'll read this whole Psalms at the end, but all that heaven happening, it still says the nations are in chaos, the kingdoms will crumble, but yet heaven's armies are right here among us. So come see the glorious works of the Lord. And then in the midst of all that, it says he can cause wars to end throughout the earth. He can calm the chaos, so be still and know that I'm God. Crazy verse in the middle of this chaos, be still, be quiet. When you're still and quiet, that's when you can be aware of some of the thin place moments as they come, when you're still. That's where strength can come. In the midst of this, and it makes no sense that particular verse is in the middle of this crazy Psalms, but yet it is. Yeah. And I think now that as your life maybe is quieted, although I know you well, it hasn't really quieted too much, but it has changed in the sense of all the trips out to LA and the season of you being on this show, The Voice, is over. And as you've had a little time to maybe be still in moments and reflect on that journey, is there a couple takeaways that you look back and say, wow, maybe that's part of what God had in mind here? Is anything, come to mind when you maybe quiet down and just think about that?
Yeah, there's a few things. One, I feel like we hope to learn a lesson one time and move on like we mastered it. And a lot of things that God shows us, we might do things faithful and right one time, and then a different circumstance can all of a sudden bring fear. You move from faith to fear in a moment, and part of that is, for me, is understanding what to do after The Voice. I feel like God gave me this hug, this kiss of a gift to also affirm my gifting that he gave me. That to have John Legend and the people say what they did about my talent, whatever, on the show. at any age, you still need that. You know, we think that more seasoned people don't need it, but it's a beautiful thing to hear that and to sense that and to again realize that this is part of what I'm called to do, is to use music to give God glory and to, but also to serve others with it. And that's where the steadiness for me comes, because, you know, at 20, 21 years old, I might be like, okay, you know, greater things and happiness is on the way because the voice happened and then something greater is going to happen. But part of me is like, no, life's great right now. Yeah. I get to be a part of Harbor, which is, I get to use my music gifting in this context where it's very clear that God is at work every time we do any event, you know, and so that's a really special place to be. And so it's kind of reaffirmed the life that God has already blessed me with, and to kind of steadily keep going with that. And also look, hey, I didn't make the voice happen per se. It kind of, this strange thing that got dropped on me. So don't now start worrying about what to do with the experience from here. Like, steadily get up each day and be the person you were, and thank God and enjoy those moments just like you did on The Voice, and continue to chase cliffs and to take risks and to continue to be authentic and trust that God's going to continue to reveal what's coming that day or next through that, you know. Yeah. I think as a young man, I'd have been like, I would be searching for meaning and happiness in this experience, where it's not quite that. I don't know if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I think one of the things I've taken from you, and they actually, I think John Legend said it to you several times on the show, that we could see on TV, was just your gratitude for the moment. And I would say there's an air of thankfulness in you, not just for that, but there's a shift in you personally that's at heightened level of just thankfulness, you know, for kind of not only the show, but...
Well, definitely. I mean, and you don't want to soon forget. That's the weird thing about going through tough times. Nobody wants to go through them.
Yeah.
But you kind of want to hold on to how much hope you lost and the despair you felt. And so then when a good season, and you are grateful for it, it's like, I have health, I have so many wonderful things. I feel like I'm being used by God, and people are encouraged by the work I'm involved in. Like, those are all such great things, you know? And so I don't think I would have been that grateful without going through the storms.
Yeah.
You know, I hate to say that, because I'm like,
don't get more.
What more? We don't want more. I don't want more storms to come. I always like, no more storms. All right, God, that's enough. But we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think before we kind of close with this, going back through the Psalms in its entirety and inviting people to quiet down and have some of those moments of stillness. I mean, one story you shared, and you talked about how God continues to use you in your giftedness, but that has struck me about the show was you got invited to a party after the show was over, and it was unique. I mean, maybe just talk about that a moment.
Yeah, that was probably one of the greatest moments and gifts that God gave me, and it simply was, you know, the show ends, came in third place. Of course, everybody wanted to win. A win would have been amazing, but to get to the end is a win. And then I got invited to kind of like an after party with the band and most of the crew, which was super fun. It was like a crusty dive bar, and everybody's singing karaoke, and, you know, they pulled me up to sing one of the songs and that I did on the show and stuff. It was fun. It was a celebration, and my family was there with me. My kids were there, and they were getting to enjoy that as well. But a few people came up to me, like, and then just wanted to pull me aside and had some very specific words to say. And the music director, he's just like, you know what, just so you know that we really enjoyed working with you this season. It's like you always stayed steady. A lot was thrown at you, and you just worked well with it, and you were always gracious, and and he's telling me a lot of times behind the scenes, you don't realize, but he named names, these singers, like they crumbled. Yeah. They crumbled in that moment, and it was off camera and stuff, but you never did. And which is crazy for him to say, because I remember going into a lot of these rehearsals like, I have no idea I don't have the song down yet. Like, the cameras are going to be rolling. Like, I was so embarrassed. I thought I was letting the band down and John Legend down and all these things. But to hear that was just another gift from God going, kind of like, well done. Like, keep going, keep staying on that path. Because for me, it's easy the times on camera to look like a man of gratitude and whatever, right? But for the people behind the scenes who have done this for 25 seasons, to come find me, pull me aside, and give those words that this is who you were all along when the camera wasn't rolling. Yeah, that's pretty rich. Man, what a gift. And I'm full of failure. You know, I know I failed in a lot of ways, but that was just another beautiful gift to that's what you want to be. That's what we want to be to our families. That's what we want to be to whoever we come in contact with. Like, we want to know that there's something that God's in us, kind of continually working with us, that we're not any different when the cameras aren't rolling, you know?
Yeah, that's really good. So when we started this, you said something about heading into this. What was your theme word?
Authentic,
yeah. That was your theme word, and that's something I do regularly, and that's something we invite others to do, is look for a word or phrase, a kind of theme year round, and the coming year ahead of you. And last year for me, it was stay wild, was the words that came to me, and that's become really the theme for Harbor Ministry going forward too, to stay wild. This psalm we're about to read, totally a wild psalm, but also in the midst of it is the invitation to stay and be quiet. That story we shared, the fly fisherman during the fire in Estes Park, that was a person that was staying in the midst of the storm. It was also wild that he was staying in the midst of the storm. And that's the invitation. It's become a very passionate 2 words for you and I, going forward, and for the organization Harbor, an invitation for people to stay grounded, but keep taking wild steps toward God and keep taking chances. Very powerful themes. I've written a book on it called Stay Wild that we talked about quite a bit on this podcast, and you've written a song called Stay Wild, which we're close to being able to connect those 2 projects together here and let people hear it. So
can't wait.
Quick word on that.
Well, I just remember when we were working that out, like when I first heard Stay Wild, I heard it as the complete phrase, which on the surface is just stay wild, be a wild person. It's like, no, these words are together and separate. There's the wild side, and then there's the stay side. And sometimes just even what Harbor was created to do was to invest heavily in a small number of people, 20 at a time. And that is a wild thing. Yeah. And so many people, past board members, I mean, they have encouraged what's next. How are you going to do this different? How do we expand? And, how do we grow this thing to like it's some American business enterprise or something. And the stay part has always been, wait a minute, no, this was the original formula, and the wild thing to do is to stay doing exactly what we started to do. Yeah. Right. So, I mean, those words and those words together just kind of blossom. I mean, even right now, like after The Voice, it's like, you know what, just stay. You don't have to completely change who you are. Be who you were. God brought these moments and opportunities, like stay. But it's kind of wild to say yes to things and not let the voices in your head, talk you out of doing something that could go wrong or could fail, Yep. So, I love it. I can't wait to share the song.
Yeah, me too. I think people are going to love it. And so, a couple action steps for y'all if you're listening to this or watching this. Go to harborministry.com and consider applying for one of these journeys. That would be a wild step. That would be absolutely a wild step for many of you. But think about it. Do it. Take that chance and do it. You can get the resources too on that site, the Stay Wild book. And when that writing of that book exploded for me is when you separated those words for me. Just like you just said, it's stay and wild. And you separate those two words. Man, the writing of that book just exploded. I think it's something that could help people. I hope it is. I think it has already. And I know you're going to love this song. As we kind of release that, it's going to be great. So as we close this up, we're going to just slow read Psalms 46 in its entirety. And I'm going to ask you to have one of those quiet moments as you're listening or watching this, to kind of take a deep breath. This is something we do regularly on this podcast. This is a much longer episode than we typically do, but I know we wanted to do it to give people a chance to hear your amazing journey the last year on The Voice and some of the stories around that. But now maybe the most important thing we can give you is just a couple minutes to take a deep breath. Enter in, see what words or phrases out of this incredible Psalms, I think such an important Psalms for our times and the days in which we live, what you'd have for us. So I just want to end with this. God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So you and I, we need not fear when the earthquakes come and when the mountains crumble to the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble as the waters surge. A river brings joy to the city of God, the sacred home of the Most High. But God dwells in that city. It will not be destroyed. It cannot be destroyed. From the very break of day, God will protect it. The nations may be in chaos. Our politics in this country in chaos. Kingdoms may crumble. But God's voice thunders and the earth melts. I got to pause it for me. I mean, that's just awesome to think about that. In the midst of all that, God's voice thunders and the earth will melt. The Lord of heaven army is right here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. So come see the glorious works of the Lord. He can cause wars to end throughout the earth. He breaks the bow and snaps the spear. So be still. Be still and know that I'm God. I will be honored in every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. God is our fortress. So friends, that's the invitation going forward. Be still. Be still, because in the stillness you can find strength. In the stillness you can find the courage to take the steps maybe you feel like you want to take. In the stillness comes that strength in the eye of the storm to be that fisherman in the midst of all the chaos around us. Peace, friends.